Hello, time for story time. Now, if you remember yesterday, Kensuke and Michael were building a relationship, weren't they? And Michael was finding out more about Kensuke and his painting in particular, showing him how to paint. The evidence that he was a considerable craftsman was all around me. The cave house must have been entirely furnished by him, fashioned mostly from flotsam, that's wood that gets washed up from the sea. The chests, the workbench itself, the shelves, the table. They must have made the rush matting, the bamboo panelling, everything. And on close examination, I could see it was all perfectly finished. No nails, no screws, just neat doweling. He had used some form of glue where necessary, and sometimes twine as well. Ropes for tree climbing, fishing spears, fishing nets, and fishing rods were all stacked in one corner. Though I'd never yet seen him use the rods. He had to have made them all. He'd made his own paintbrushes as well, and I was soon to find out how. Kensuke had a favourite orangutan, a large female called Tomodachi, who would often come and sit by him to be groomed. Kensuke was grooming her one day just outside the mouth of the cave house. Get your teeth around that. And the other orangutans looking on when I saw him quite deliberately pluck out the longest and darkest hairs from her back. He held them up to show me, grinning conspiratorially. At the time I didn't really understand what he was up to. Later, I watched him at his workbench, trimming the hairs with his knife, dipping them in sap I'd seen him tap from a tree that same morning, cutting out a short length of hollow bamboo, and then filling it with Tomodachi's hair. A day later, the glue had hardened, and he had a paintbrush. Kensuke seemed to have found ways to satisfy his every need. We were silent at our painting one day, the rain thundering down and on the forest below, when he stopped, put his paintbrush down, and said very slowly, in a very measured way, as if he'd thought about how to say it for a long time, "I teach you painting, Mika." That was the first time he had ever called me by my name. "You teach me speak English. I want speak English. You teach me." It was the beginning of an English lesson that would last for months. Every day, dawn to dusk, I translated the world around him into English. We did what we had always done, but now I talked all the while, and he would echo every word, every phrase he wanted to. His brow would furrow with the effort of it. It was as if, by saying each word, he simply swallowed it into his brain. Once told, once practised, he would rarely forget, and if he did, he was always very annoyed with himself. Sometimes, excuse me, I was enunciating a new word. I noticed that his eyes would light up. He would be nodding and smiling, almost as if he recognised the word, as if he was greeting an old friend. He would repeat it again and again, savouring the sound of it before committing it to memory for good. And of course, the more words he knew, the more he tried to experiment with them. Single words became clipped phrases, became entire sentences. His pronunciation, though, never did improve, however hard he tried. Michael was always Mika, sometimes Mika-san. Now, at last, we could talk more easily to one another. The long silence in which our friendship had been forged was over. It had never been a barrier between us, but it had been limiting. We were sitting by the cave mouth one sunset, when he said, "You see now if I understand, Mika-san. You tell me story of you, where you live, why you come here, my island, from baby to now. I listen." So I did. I told him about home, about my mother and father, about the brick factory closing, about football with Eddie and the Mudlarks, about the Peggy Sue and our voyage around the world, about football in Brazil and lions in Africa and spiders in Australia, about my mother being ill, about the night I fell overboard. "Very good. I understand," he said when I had finished. "So, football you like. When I little, I play football too. Very happy time, long ago now in Japan, in my home." He sat in silence for a few moments. "You very long way from home, Mika-san. You very sad sometimes." "I see. So, I make you happy. Tomorrow we go fishing, and maybe I tell you my story too. My story, your story, Maybe the same story now. The sun had suddenly gone. We stood up and bowed to one another. We've got some Japanese now. Oyasumi Masai, he said. Good night, I said. It was the only time of the day he ever spoke Japanese, though he did sing in Japanese mostly. I'd taught him 10 Green Bottles, which always made him laugh when he sang it. I loved his laugh. It was never loud, more a prolonged chuckle, but it always warmed my heart. The next morning, he picked up 2 of his fishing rods and a net and led the way into the forest. Today we catch big fish, Mika, not small fish, he announced. He was taking us to the part of the island where I'd been washed up all those months before, but rarely had cause to visit since, because there was little or no fruit to be found there. We had to beat a difficult path through the forest before joining a cliff path that wound its way down to a hidden sandy bay. As we emerged from the forest onto the beach, Stella ran off. Excuse me. Bounding at once into the shallows, barking at me to play with her. Suddenly, Kensuke caught me by the arm. You look, Mika-san. What you see? His eyes were full of mischief. I didn't know what I was supposed to be looking for. Nothing here, yes. I, very clever fellow. You watch, I show you. He made for the end of the beach, and I followed. Once there, he began to pull and tug at the undergrowth. To my surprise, it simply came away in his hands. I saw first what looked like a log lying in the sand, but then, as he dragged away more branches, I saw it was part of a boat, an outrigger, a long, wide dugout with a frame of outriggers on either side. It was covered in canvas, which he folded back very slowly, chuckling to himself as he did so. And there, lying in the bottom of the boat, beside a long oar, was my football. He reached in and tossed it to me. It was softer now, and much of the white leather was cracked and discoloured, but in places I could still make out Eddie's name.